Hey, Roger.
Hi, Judy.
Hi.
You're on live to the whole room.
I see that. And I'm going to claim host.
Right.
Oh, it wants me to do a host key. Okay, hold on a sec. Oh, this is fun. Oh goodness, I don't know where that is.
Oh, I see. This isn't hooked up yet. Judy, where's your mask? Now I know why you stayed home.
Funny. Oh, Marilyn's calling.
Marilyn's
Hold
calling
on.
you, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Roger. So
Well, that was fun.
Judy, do a sound test for us.
Hey,
Okay.
Judy, just a quick sound test. You're working with Roger right now. Go ahead.
No. You talk. I want to hear you. Can you hear me?
I hear you just
Hear me
fine.
fine. Okay. What I was going to do is I want to make you guys co-hosts so that we don't have any weird stuff happening here. So let me see if I can do that. Oh, you know what? I don't think it's going to let me do that.
Yeah.
I think it's only one host. So I'm not seeing
I
my
may
ability.
have to do it.
Well, I just claimed host because I put in your, see if you can do it because I can't do it. I don't seem to be able to do that.
Well, are you using your Zoom or the club Zoom?
It's the club Zoom.
It's weird.
Yeah, because when I came on first, it wasn't letting me do anything. So then I went in and I went in and used the club Zoom and I put in the digits to claim host, but it's not letting me make any of you co-host.
You have to make house make.
Hey, Judy, I got the keys here. So
Can you do it?
yeah, I'm making you want to be host?
Either host or co-host, you can
I'm
decide.
gonna make you co-host.
Okay. Oh, I'm glary today too.
Also, Robin Gabbard's asking.
One quick second.
Oh, good. You are able to do it. It wouldn't let me do it.
All right. Hey, Judy. Roger's co-host, you're co-host, and I'm host. So we're good.
And there's Jeff. Yay!
Hello.
Welcome,
I know it
Jeff.
says Danette there, which I apologize for, but that's my wife's
Jeff,
name.
just briefly, I'm gonna make you co-host because we got to take care of stuff on site here.
I'm gonna rename you for today though.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
You want to do a quick test with Judy too?
Oh, this is weird. It's not letting me do that. I think you're gonna have to do it from your side and you can go under preferences and just change it. Yeah, this is behaving a little weird. Okay, so I can't rename Jeff. I think you have to do it, Sean. It is not letting me do stuff. Oh, interesting. Everybody sounds really echoey in the room. Not online. We all sound fine. Okay. Okay. So now, Jeff, you're co-host, so you'll be able to share your slides. That won't be any
Okay.
problem. This is exciting. I'm going to zip out for about 2 minutes. I'll be right back.
You know, it didn't go well?
What's that?
It didn't go well?
Oh, no. It's the pre-op. They took blood, they took all the tests, the breathing machine to see if you can handle all this. Apparently, it only takes 2 hours,
Yeah.
but, I guess when you get older, everything falls apart.
Well, we have a lot of folks coming today.
Roger,
Yes?
would you mute?
What?
Would you put on mute? I think with you being in that hall, we're getting a lot of feedback.
Yep.
Well, I'm the host.
You're a co-host, honey.
I understand that.
Yeah, I figured, I came because I figured you'd be here, and you're always working so hard.
Why did it just take that off?
What's that?
What? There you go. Okay, now we're good. Well, this is a learning experience. Last month, we had a live speaker and we were trying to also share it on Zoom, and we didn't have it quite as smooth as it could have been. This month, I think that part is okay, but I stayed home to do this from my office because you can tell when you've got people in the room and you're trying to set up and they're talking to you, it's like my brain's gonna go all over the place. I'm much nicer being here.
It's a weird mix of advantages and disadvantages. The online stuff. It's easier in some ways, but the disconnection is strange. So
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, some of us can sit 700 miles away and be right here.
which is amazing. But then at the same time, I can't walk up to people afterwards and just shake their hand and say hi,
Yep. That is so true. And we're just going to keep figuring it out as we go along.
Right.
Yeah. I'm okay being in person with folks I am very confident are vaccinated and are taking good care of themselves. When I don't know, I don't know. And I'm finding that, well, I was listening to Brene Brown was interviewing Priya Parker, and she was talking about the fact that we're going to be going through these micro rejections because you don't know, some people I'm okay if they ask if they can hug me, that's fine. And other times I'm like, backing out the door. And it's different with each situation. So we're going to be experiencing that for quite a long time. And I don't know if we're going to go back to shaking hands on a regular basis. It'll be
No, it's an excellent point. Yeah, definitely. It's going to have an impact on our behaviors for decades to come.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, goodness. Well, it looks like, you've got a guitar behind you. Oh, tell us. Oh, two of them. Wait a minute. I didn't see the other one.
I'm a passionate amateur.
All right.
There's a consensus. I'll play a little bit later. No, I'm just kidding. Nobody wants that.
Not necessarily. I still have a video. Sam Barry played his banjo at a presentation that he did. And Amy Tan was here in Sonoma talking about at the Authors Fest. And she was saying how when she joined the Rock Bottom Remainders, how funny it was. And, some of the people in that band can't play, but they have a good time and it doesn't matter because they just go to have a good time. Raise money. It doesn't, it's
Well,
more
true.
about-
Yeah.
it's a fun thing. I think. Yeah. Oh, good. Well, we're getting our folks in order here. So when did you start attempting to play?
Probably, gosh, close to 15 years ago now, I guess.
Oh, wow.
It was something I'd always talked about. I used to always say, I'd love to play guitar. I'd love to learn how to play any instrument at all. And then one day for my birthday, my wife bought me an acoustic guitar and a bunch of lessons. And she said, please shut up about this. Please just go and do something about it. And it was one of those wonderful moments where like she did the thing I just had been too lazy to do. And I fell in love and I've been playing every day ever since. So.
Oh, that's great. That is
Does it play some sort of instrument?
Yeah.
It's all the way up. So either we have to move it in the other room.
All right.
Where it comes
Oh, if you're moving around, please put your camera on still and also mute yourself. And then when you're talking, you can unmute because everybody can hear you. This is fun. You can see where it says Roger, that's the meeting space that we're in now. We used to meet in a hotel, and then right before COVID, they were purchased. And so we knew we were going to move and we were going to go to the Finley Center, which is where they are. And then that happened. And so we immediately went online. And the first month, I did a training session on how to use Microsoft Word. And then we picked back up with our speaker schedule. Thanks to Marilyn. She has been coordinating this and, being fabulous. And we've had a great time. And so we got to have some people that wouldn't have been possible during our regular sessions. So
yeah, that's one of the weird aspects of this is the opportunities it strangely opened up because travel wasn't an issue and reimbursing people isn't an issue necessarily for things. And so suddenly it's like all these options are there that weren't there before.
Yeah. Had you had a real full schedule booked out?
I only had one sort of recurring thing that I had already planned to do last year that sort of got canceled and then shifted online. It got canceled and then brought back from the dead and then shifted online, which is I do the Writer's Digest annual conference every year. And that's kind of like the one thing I know for sure I'm going to do every year. Everything else, I'm sort of like, I'm all over the place. I get invited to things here and there, but that's the one regular occurrence that I had. And that got canceled, but then they resurrected it online these last 2 years. So I still got to participate, which I was really excited about.
Yeah. Well, I think that's been fun because one of the things I know I was exposed to, I used Pro Writing Aid. Roger introduced me to that. And they immediately pivoted and started doing online webinars. So like the first part of the pandemic, that was just, oh my God, just blew my mind. having access to so many good people. And I
Mhm.
think afterwards like I got to a saturation point. So now I'm not like on Zoom. I was already working on Zoom, but I'm not like having to grab every.
Hey, Jeff, before we
Yes.
get started, we're live and I'm trying to figure out this hybrid thing. Welcome. Thank you.
No,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Marilyn Lanier is here and she's going to do the introduction, but we want to make sure that you guys can hear sound and we're going to do it standing up so we can talk to the people here too. So from a sound check, can you guys hear us all right if we stand here?
Mhm.
Sean, if you're going to stand there and you're that far back, please take your mask off so we can hear you because you get your little garbled.
How's that?
Better.
All right. So be right around
So
here,
I need to
Marilyn.
be right here.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. We'll
Hi.
get a
Hi, Jeff.
Hello.
we'll get started in about 5 to 8 minutes, you guys.
Are his slides?
I'm sorry, you're cracking me up. You're cracking me up. Okay. Oh, no, don't want to do that. All right, we're good. So this is all being it's already recording. So just so you all know, behave yourselves. This is a good group. We don't really have to worry about that too much, but it's fun. It is.
What
fun.
about me? Is anyone worried about me and whether I need to filter myself?
Well, you're kind of a wild card. So. Oh, too fun. Too much.
I think I know what I'm doing with all the Zoom stuff, but bear with me if there's minor disasters along the way.
Everybody's very forgiving, and so far everything, most of the time, it's worked. Oh, I will tell you one funny story though. The worst disaster on Zoom was a professional presenter, and she was connected on her phone, her pad, and her desktop, and Zoom wasn't cooperating that day.
Oh.
She had to keep switching from one to the other, and it was so funky, but it was so good because she never missed a beat.
Oh, right. There's skill involved in that.
She really, people stayed with us.
Mhm.
They stayed with the presentation, and in the end, it was a good lesson because if you don't get flustered, your
Right.
audience goes, "Oh, okay, we're hanging in."
Yeah, that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned is no matter what happens, just keep going. Pick up the pieces, acknowledge problems, maybe make a joke or something, but don't give up. Just keep plowing forward. And usually your audience will stay with you because they want you to succeed. They want to hear what you have to say. So,
Yeah.
don't just immediately be like, oh my God, and run off the stage in tears. Although
Oh.
that's probably a good viral moment. That would be all over YouTube the next day.
Oh my God, it would. Oh gosh. Yeah. And I mean, we've had blackouts, we've had
Oh, no.
stuff go, you never know. We've been very fortunate this year so far.
Mhm.
So far. We haven't had any outside weird influences that.
I'm sorry, did you just jinx me? Is that what just happened here?
No, I did not. I did not. I had not done that. And it's going to rain this afternoon, so we're really happy about that because it's boy, it is so dry in California.
Yeah, I've read about all that's going on out there. We've had sort of the opposite problem here. We've had way too much rain. We got pretty bad flooding a couple of weeks ago here in town. So
yeah.
Now
this is I'm a native Californian. This is the worst I have ever seen it.
Really?
Entire life. Yeah.
Wow.
I moved to Northern California in 74 and we were in a drought then. No, doesn't even compare to this.
Really?
I mean, stuff is it's like dust everywhere.
Gosh. You can't win. It's anywhere you go in the world these days. You're going to have something to deal with like that.
Yeah.
There's a natural disaster waiting for you wherever you go.
Yep, it is. It seems like it, but I'm hoping we'll make it through. If we make it through another month without something burning right near where we are, we should be good.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah, I think so. And I hope it doesn't keep flooding all these places that don't normally have that problem. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Very, very crazy.
Yeah.
When you started working with Writer's Digest, how did that all come about?
It was a sort of a bit of serendipity. I sold a novel to a small publisher called Tyrus Books, who are no longer exist, and they were owned by F&W Media. So it was one of those synergy moments because F&W Media also owned Writer's Digest at the time, and so they needed people to make presentations at their annual conference. And my editor called me up and said, they're looking for somebody to make a presentation. You know, you've got a book to promote. Why don't you go and do that? And it was in New York City, which is, you know, a 10-minute train ride. So I said, sure. And I came up with this little presentation and, you know, I gave it at the conference, and the editor of Writer's Digest magazine audits, you know, they go around and audit the presentations. And she came up to me afterwards and she said, would you write that up for the magazine? Would you write that in an article form, which you just presented? And I said, sure. And then after that, you know, the door was open. So I just started pitching article ideas and, you know, been lucky enough to sort of be a regular contributor ever since then.
Yeah. Well, I think you brought up a really good point too, is always be ready to say yes.
Yes. Yeah, that was one of my first articles I wrote for Writer's Digest, which was, you know, when I started freelancing, because I'm a freelance writer as well. And it was terrifying because I had no experience, I had no contacts. And, but I sort of spent the first year just taking just about every job that came along. Like anyone said, you know, can you write this for me? And I said, yes. And then I would think later, can I? But, you know, it was always yes first, and then I'll figure it out. And that really worked out for me. Like just being positive and being open to things that maybe my instinct was, no, maybe I can't do that. But then I found out that I could. So yeah, yes is really powerful in a writing career, no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Oh boy. And you know, sometimes things show up that you don't think are quite the right thing, but then because you said yes, then you know, like if you wouldn't have said yes to one, the next thing wouldn't have happened. So
right.
You meet people that way. It's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. It just leads to new opportunities, and not always, you know, not always professional, not always paying opportunities. Sometimes it's just a learning opportunity or a networking opportunity or just an experience that informs your work later on, you know, so it can be really powerful to put yourself in sort of uncomfortable positions like that.
Hey, I gotta give both you guys props for carrying the load here. It's part of the learning curve as far as figuring out how to do it virtually and in person. So I've got a bad echo here. In any event, we're gonna go ahead and get kicked off. It's something I'll have to figure out on this end. It's one more learning curve because I get to hear my voice twice and I don't like to hear myself talk that much. But welcome, Jeff. Welcome, everyone. We've got, I don't know, there's a lot of people that'll be coming in later on. There's at least about 15 to 20 people here. So we are in the tail end, hopefully, knock on wood, of this unnecessary but necessary juggling act as we have to continue moving forward with our meetings. So Judy, thank you. Jeff, thank you for piping in. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our Vice President and our Speaker Liaison, Marilyn Lanier, to give you a proper introduction, and let's get started, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Sean. So this is always an experiment these days, right? This is what hybrid meetings mean, I guess. But anyway, welcome all of you here in person. And Jeff, a special welcome to you. We're all grateful to you for being here via Zoom all the way from Hoboken, New Jersey, right?
Yes.
Is that where you are today?
Yeah, that's why I'm at home. Yeah.
That's one advantage, one silver lining to this pandemic, is we can have speakers from far away and really outstanding speakers like you. So I want to also thank Bob Isbell, who's not here, of course. He's from the High Desert branch of the California Writers Club, and I know you know him, Jeff, because he was the one who recommended you as a prospective speaker based on your speech over a year ago, I believe, to the High Desert Club on short stories, correct?
Yep.
And he was very impressed, and he said the club just thought you were a great success. So there you go. I also know your presentation is going to be great because I scanned your slides ahead of time. But before you begin, I wanted to let everybody know a few things about you. I know your presentation, let's see, you've published 9 novels, including the Avery Kate series of noir science fiction novels from Orbit Books, the darkly hilarious crime novel, Chum, is that how you pronounce it?
Chum.
Chum, thank you, from Tyrus Books, and most recently, Tales of Blood Magic and Short Cons in the Ustari cycle. You have some interesting names here that I have to get accustomed to. But perhaps most apropos of your presentation today, you've published over 40 short stories, including Ringing the Changes, which was selected for inclusion in Best American Mystery Stories 2006. You also write about books for BookBub and about the craft of writing for Writer's Digest, which published your book on the craft of writing, Writing Without Rules, in 2018. So thanks for sharing your insights on the craft of short story writing and offering your business perspective and how they can be an important part of our writerly careers. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sean. I appreciate that. And thank you to everybody for having me. I'm always very, very flattered to be invited to engage in things like this, either in person or over Zoom. And I really love talking about writing and books and the craft of writing. You know, I'm that guy that will talk endlessly about those subjects until people are literally leaving the room, you know, backing away from me. So anytime I can do that with sort of a stamp of societal approval, it makes me very, very happy. A couple of just some quick housekeeping for me is one, what I'm always conscious of when I do these Zoom things is I start to realize how often I touch my face while I talk. So I apologize for that in advance. Also, at some point during this presentation, my earbuds will pop out of my ears for no reason whatsoever, and I will have to scramble to put them back in because that happens every single time. And there's probably a 70% chance that a cat will suddenly obscure the camera and possibly step on my keyboard and disconnect me. So I've seen a couple of cattails out there on these screens. So I think some of you know my pain when it comes to trying to herd cats while you're doing these things. I'm going to ramble on here for 40 minutes or so, give or take, and then I would like everyone, if you don't mind, to hold questions till the end, and then I'll be happy to hang around as long as necessary to answer any questions there are. Hopefully there are a few. If we run out of time, or if you don't think of a question during this presentation, I'll be putting up my contact info at the end too, and I encourage anybody to give me a shout, send me an email, stalk me on Twitter. Track me down. I'm always happy to answer a question. And even if it's something, a long ago, a long time afterwards, after this ends, like, weeks or months from now, feel free to get in touch and I'll always respond to something if you think I have something to contribute. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and put up my slides. And this will be the first moment where things will either just completely fall apart or things will be smooth. So I haven't done this part in a while. So let's see. Let me know if this is working, or let me know if it's not working. I see. I knew this was a mistake. Never try, as Homer Simpson says. Here's what we're going to do. I apologize. Although, as everyone was saying before, it is easy for these things to go bad. All right. Does that look okay? Thumbs up? All right, great. Thank you. Hopefully that's the last time you have to watch me peer at my screen while I tap inscrutable commands into my computer. So this is short stories for fun and profit. And I'm going to do, sort of a little bit of an introduction to give you a little more background. As they mentioned, I published a lot of short stories, a couple of dozen short stories. I'm a huge fan of short stories. I love short stories. I love writing short stories. And what's interesting, or at least I think is interesting, that like a lot of people here, I started writing as a kid. I started writing, discovered a bunch of epic fantasy novels when I was like 9 or 10 years old. I was that kid who was lugging around the Lord of the Rings, in sixth grade, and probably not really understanding all of it, but knowing that it was awesome. Like really loving the epic aspect of it, and part of it was honestly the size and the girth of it. Like you sort of picked up those books and were like, this is important, like this is great, and tore through everything I could find. And I'm incredibly old, so this is way before there was Amazon or ebooks or anything like that. So all my books had to be sourced from the library or a bookstore. So I had to, go and cobble together my allowance and get on a bus and go and find books. And so I kind of ran out of books, which in the modern day is mind blowing. How could you possibly run out of books? I can pick up my phone and within 30 seconds, I can buy 16 books, and have them downloaded. But back then it was a little more challenging, especially when you're a kid. So I got to a point where I honestly started writing because I ran out of books to read and I wanted to create more stories. And the first things I wrote when I was a kid were all meant to be novels because that's what I had always experienced. I started writing novels, and the first thing I did was I tried to write a 300,000 word novel, which, as it turned out, was an incredible ripoff of the Lord of the Rings, which shouldn't surprise anybody. I basically just sort of searched and replaced names, and if I tried to ever publish this first book I wrote, I would be sued out of existence. But it was, obviously I was a kid. It was a learning experience. But the first thing I ever tried to write were novels, and I had no interest in anything else until I got into high school, and because my guidance counselor started to ride me about the fact that I didn't participate in anything. I was that kid who, like, eighth period ended, I was on the bus going home immediately. And they used to always say, like, you need activities, you need to have something on your transcript, show colleges that you're not some weird robot kid that just goes to class and goes home. And the only thing I was even vaguely interested in was the literary magazine. And obviously the literary magazine was not going to publish my 200,000 word fantasy epic, so I needed to start writing some shorter stuff. And that's the only reason I started to write short stories, was to get into the literary magazine. And obviously the literary magazine at my high school basically published anything that, if any kid bothered to show up with a story, they would put it in there. But that exercise made me realize that I really enjoyed working on short stories. There was something really magical about, there was something freeing about working on short stories. And what that makes me think of these days, and something I've written about and talked about a lot at other conferences and with other writers, is that all of us writers, we're sort of born with this genetic code as a writer. There's certain things that are instinctual for us. Like, for example, I wanted to write long form from the very beginning, and short form was something I had to discover, and everybody's like that. Some of us are plotters, some of us are pantsers, some of us are a mixture in between. And it's this instinctual approach that we have to the craft. But at the same time, writing is a skill, and it can, to a very large extent, be taught, and you can learn new skills and you can change your skill set in writing. It's not all instinct. It's not all natural talent. There's sort of a mix in there. And so short stories often get overlooked in the modern world for a wide variety of reasons. Novels get all the splashy promotion. Novels get all the big name awards. Traditionally, although this is changing and something I'll talk about later, but traditionally novels are what get adapted into films and television series. And novels are also where sort of the discrete sums of money that you can latch onto, like a book advance or a royalty check, come from. So that there's a lot of reasons why we tend to focus on novels as writers. And the novel has sort of evolved into almost a graduation thing where you're a real professional writer, when you sell a novel. No matter how many short stories you might have sold or how many plays you've written or poems or stuff, until you get that novel out there, there's sort of this prejudice that, you're not really in the big leagues yet. You're still sort of in the minors, which just for the record, I totally disagree with that. And I think it is completely a very incorrect way to view this career of writing, this profession, but it is out there. You encounter it a lot. But I think that short stories are incredibly powerful, and they're really powerful in both terms of improving your craft and improving your writing in general and your control over your writing. And they're also incredibly powerful, more powerful than a lot of writers think, in terms of your career, both financially and just in terms of promoting yourself and getting more opportunities for your work to get out there. Those are the two things I'm going to be talking about today. Those two tracks, craft and career. And I'm going to start off talking about craft a little bit and what I think short stories can do to improve your craft. And then I'll jump into my experience, at least, how short stories can help your career. And that brings us to a sort of a blanket disclaimer. And then the first part of that disclaimer is that your mileage may vary. My experience is my experience, and I always dislike people who are gurus who get up here and it's like, this is how it's done because this is how I did it. And that's not necessarily the case. Luck always plays a part in these things. Circumstances play a part in these things. The network that you have access to plays a part in these things. So when I say this has helped me, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help everybody, but it is something to think about. So just keep that in mind. Your mileage may vary. Your experience may be very different than mine, and I acknowledge that. And hopefully my experience is helpful to you, even if it isn't exactly what happens for you. The other part of this is that clearly, as I've just said, I'm very biased. I love short stories, and I've had a lot of success writing them. I enjoy writing them. So obviously, I'm not going to give you the other side of this argument. I'm not going to be the guy to tell you, well, maybe short stories aren't so great. So keep that in mind as well. I'm extremely biased on this subject, and my bias has been confirmed by some of the success I've had. So I'm not exactly, going to give you both sides of this discussion. So with that in mind, we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about how short stories can help your craft. And I'm going to start by talking about the fact that I write a short story every month without fail. And I've done this for, I'm extremely old, as I mentioned before. So I've probably done this now for about 30 years. Every single month I write at least a short story. That's not a hard limit. I've written more than that during a month. I work on other things during the month, but I will, in notebooks, writing out longhand, I will write a short story every single month. And this started off when I was in college because I was an English major because I had, obviously no concern about making a living when I got older. So, I figured I'll just get an English degree. And some of you may have experienced this too. When you first start writing, at whatever age you start writing, you start to, everything you read, every conversation you have about books, every story you read, every novel you read, you're just excited about what you find in there, the techniques that you find. The first time that you read Ulysses and you're like, this stream of consciousness stuff is amazing. You're like, you want to run home and you want to write a story using that technique. Every time an author surprises you or fools you or does something incredibly subtle that you suddenly realize I finally see what they just did there, you want to run home and you want to write that story. And that was me. I had so many ideas. I couldn't, there was not enough time in the day. There was not enough media for me to work on to get these ideas out. Especially, if I was going to confine myself to a keyboard and just, when I had spare time at home to sit down and write, I would never get enough done. So I started to carry around a notebook and a pen, and I would just work on short stories whenever I had the opportunity. Riding the bus, I would pull it out and start working on that. Waiting in a waiting room for a doctor's appointment or something, pull it out. When I got a little bit older and I started working for a living, at a day job, I was always that guy who was taking notes furiously in every meeting that I got called into. And people were like, look at Jeff, he's so diligent. He's so, he's so into his job. Well, no, I was writing a short story, and not paying any attention to what was going on. As I got older, that sort of excitement, that sort of constant stream of, oh my God, I got to work on this immediately sort of faded a little bit. And the monthly short stories stopped being sort of like a pressure valve to let all these ideas out. And it evolved into an exercise. And that is really precisely what it is at this point. I write these stories every month, but there's no requirement that they be good short stories. There's no requirement that they be polished, coherent, or that they really work in any way. The only requirements I have is that they be finished. That's the one thing that I stick to, is that every month I work on a story and I finish that story within 31, 30, 29, 28 days, whatever the month offers me. And I do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think short stories are a great way to practice, which, it's not me saying that short stories are not real fiction or, they can't be sold professionally or something like that. But they offer this incredible opportunity to capture ideas and let you flex your writing muscles a little bit without the long-term commitment of a novel or, any kind of a longer form piece of fiction. I'm sure some of you carry around notebooks, you know, or some kind of a notebook. Maybe it's a note app on your phone or something like that. And when you have an idea or a thought for a story, whether it's a new story or a way you can work on something you've already got in the works, and you jot down a note, you know, to capture your thought. And I used to do that. And what I found, and this again, purely my experience, what I found is that I would go back to those notes days, weeks, months later, and not always really understand what I was trying to tell myself, because either past Jeff is a moron or future Jeff is a moron. One of us is a moron, and we could not figure out to save our lives what we were trying to tell each other. Or sometimes it was just the fact that I could remember what I was trying to convey, but the magic was gone. Whatever inspiration in the moment I had, that delicious moment of, oh, wow, this is amazing, I'm going to capture this, and I failed to capture it. So what I do with these short stories every month is I use them as sort of mega notebooks. Instead of just jotting down, you know, drunk rabbits rob a bank, you know, and then figure I'm going to know what that means, you know, 2 months from now when I get around to it, I'll start writing a story about drunk rabbits robbing a bank, and I'll pour anything I can think of into that story. You know, I'll try and capture the moment of inspiration. You know, what was the atmosphere that made me think of this? Why did I think that was a good idea to begin with? You know, because that's obviously a ridiculous premise. So there must have been a reason I got excited about it. And then I'll go in and just dump stuff in there, like, oh, what if the rabbits did this? What if the bank had this going on? And just throw it in there. And then I just try really hard to tie it all up in some ridiculous or often very bad way, you know, to have an ending. So am I saying that I write terrible endings in these stories? Absolutely. I have something even I call the plane crash ending, which is when I've literally got 35 minutes before the stroke of midnight and I haven't finished the story. And I would just sort of bring a natural disaster in and just kill everybody on the page and say, the end. Because these stories are not meant to be, you know, off the page perfect and like send them out. I don't rip them out of the notebook and just mail them off and say, here, give me $100 for the story. They're meant to be stubs. They're meant to be beginnings, and I'll go back and revise them later, or I'll steal from them later. I'll bring them in and put them into something else, which is another aspect of what makes writing these stories so powerful for your craft, is that they act as a laboratory. You know, I was talking earlier about being excited about a new technique or a new way of approaching fiction that you might read, and that has slowed down a little bit for me, but it still happens. You know, I'll still read a story and be really impressed by the technique of it. Not always even something new. I reread something by F. Scott Fitzgerald a couple of years ago, and I was mesmerized by his rhythm and the way he approached describing characters and places. And I explicitly sat down to write a story to try and mimic that and steal as much as I could from F. Scott Fitzgerald. So, you know, it's a great place to be like, I'm going to try something, you know, and maybe it's something as you know, that the traditionally silly challenge of like, I'm going to write in the second person, or I'm going to try and write a story without the letter E or something crazy like that. But it gives you sort of a laboratory to go in there and be a mad scientist and play around. And because it's going to be done in a month, one way or another, there's no huge time-sucking commitment where then I have to slave over this story forever and try and get it perfect and worry about it. I can just work on it, capture as much as I can capture, and then move on. And then I can go back to it a year later, 2 years later, and I may not even remember the original inspiration for that story. But what I can do is I can go through everything that I thought about it is in there. It's been captured, it's been preserved, and I can relive that and relearn it, reabsorb it, and then work with it again. And then finally, or not finally, but one huge aspect of writing this short story exercise every month is that one of the things that a lot of writers, in my experience, when I meet people and talk to them, struggle with is finishing. Finishing is one of the most powerful skills that as a writer you can have, because if your goal is to sell novels or stories, you sell exactly 0 of the novels and stories that you don't finish. And even if your goal is not so much about, oh, I want to be Stephen King and sell millions of copies and be a millionaire, maybe it's more about, I want to create an incredible piece of art, an incredible piece of fiction, and maybe somebody publishes and maybe they don't. Even so, if you don't finish it, you still don't really have a thing. You don't really have a novel. You don't really have a story. You don't have something to show people. By writing a story every month, I practice finishing. And I mentioned earlier that some of my endings are really bad, and that is true. There are desperation moments. But by forcing myself to find an ending every single time I write these stories, it's really beefed up my ability to see how endings can be found, to find those pathways. As I'm writing and I realize, okay, I'm on page 8 of this story, and I've got 3 days left in the month, and I start to think about where can I find my way to an ending on this, and that is an incredibly powerful skill that comes into play all the time, because you have to finish your stories, or else you don't really have a story, because stories have to have an ending. And I think that's often overlooked, and people think endings just sort of come or they don't matter that much. But knowing how to end the story, incredible skill that you need to have. Um, and then once I've got these stories in these notebooks, pull them out, and then I can begin the revision process. And there again is practice. There again is constantly revising something, is an incredibly powerful skill that you need as a writer. And working on these short stories, because they're relatively short, they're discrete pieces of fiction. They're not sprawling 6-volume fantasy series, or a 1,000,000-word historical romance or something like that, which requires so much energy. You've got this really short piece that you go in there and you practice revision. You practice, how can I fix this problem? How can I make this sentence better? Without having to dive in for 3 years, and emerge, pale and shaking and be like, oh, I finally finished this story. You can just sort of go in and out really quickly and be done with it. The other thing about short stories that I think is incredibly useful and powerful is the constraint of short stories. A lot of people make the mistake, I think, a lot of writers make, at least people I've talked to, make the mistake of thinking that novels are easier to write because they're longer. Or I'm sorry, I should say novels are harder to write because they're longer, is what I mean to say. Which seems to make logical sense, but I think actually the opposite is true, because novels being so kind of open-ended, I mean, there really is no upper limit, to what a novel can be as far as word count goes. Yeah, there's some marketing, limits. Publishers sort of shy away from anything over 100,000 words. But I mean, if you have a brilliant novel and you dump it on your publisher's desk and it's 750,000 words, if it's really good, they're going to publish it. I think 2 years ago, there was a 1,000,000-word novel got published. The author's name, of course, escapes me, is the guy who co-wrote the Watchmen comics. But his novel was like 1,000,000 words long, and he got it published. So and especially when you're working at home, just working on a draft of your novel, there's no real reason to worry about, oh, I'm at 107,000 words, I can't make it any longer. You just keep writing. And that ability to just keep writing is actually sort of like a gilded cage. It allows you to indulge yourself. It allows you to have characters who do nothing on the page. It allows you to be Robert Jordan. I don't know if anyone here ever read the Wheel of Time series. He had entire novels where nothing really happened in those books because he was just able to keep writing, and he just kept writing and writing and writing. And then at some point he's like, hey, you know what? This is 150,000 words. That's a novel. And they would publish it. So writing a novel can actually be harder because you can get caught in those loops of just writing and writing and writing. Short stories, on the other hand, because of the constraint, you have to think a little bit harder about, does this really need to be in there? Big mistake a lot of writers make is trying to put every single thing into their story or their novel. If they did research, historical research or technical research, they want to make sure they did that research, so they put it all onto the page. If they have lots of world building backstory, if they've created the tax code of their fantasy kingdom, if they've got schematics for their spaceships, they want you to know they did that, and they try and cram it in there. If they've written lengthy character backstories and histories, they want to get it in there. And often, I'm sure we've all heard this before, writing really comes down to what you take out. Writing is really about cutting. Writing is often about revision and taking stuff away. And short stories force you to do that because they are shorter, they're more self-contained. They force you to be a little bit more efficient about your plotting, efficient about your character introductions, efficient in your world building, efficient about just about every aspect of the writing process. You have to figure out, okay, I don't have an extra 20,000 words I can just throw at this until I get it right in the story. I have maybe 500 words that I need to build this entire character backstory in 500 words. How do I do that without just having a character stand up and do an expo dump? So it really, really forces you to learn those skills, and that makes your writing better just overall in general when you move forward from there. The other thing to think about, I don't remember if I had this as a separate, short stories are very often turn out to be really chapter one of a longer work. And this happens over and over again. My wife actually just read Crying in H Mart by Michelle Launer. And that started off as a short story she published in the New Yorker. And, an editor came up to her and said, have you ever thought about expanding that? And then it turned into a novel that she's now published. And you hear stories like that a lot, where novels begin as short stories and, and then grew into something bigger, which I think is sort of like real world examples of what I do with my monthly short story writing, where you capture everything you need as a seed of a novel in that short story, and then you're able to go back to it later and start pulling out, putting your fertilizer in there and making it all grow into something bigger. I can't believe I just sort of used that horrible little metaphor, but it's done now and it's been recorded, so it's forever out there. And this is something, this idea of novels coming from short stories is something I have done myself in my career. The first novel in the Ustari cycle is We Are Not Good People. And it began life as a short story called The Night Will Echo Back at You that I wrote and never published, but I wrote 20 years ago, give or take. And it's not a great story, to be honest with you. It's not a great story, but it captured just this moment of inspiration I had. It captured this image that I had in my head that inspired me. And the bits and pieces of that story are still in there in that novel. It's not discreetly chapter one of the novel. It is really just the seed of the novel. And I did have very recently, a couple of years ago, I published a short story in Mystery Weekly, and my agent said, have you ever thought about turning that into a novel? And I've been talking to a publisher just recently about, I wrote a bunch of short stories that sort of turned into a story cycle. And now I'm talking about, about how I can turn that into more of a novel with more of a central storyline and an arc. So short stories are not always just discrete things that you write and then either publish or not, or put aside or get into a collection or anything like that. Sometimes they are the beginning of something bigger, and it's just a way of letting your creative muscles flex and get as much of that world and those characters onto the page or onto the screen as possible so that you can do something about them later on. All right. That is those are my thoughts about short stories and craft. I mean, I probably could talk about this for another 3 hours, but they only gave me, an hour here. So you can complain to everybody in charge later when you say like, oh, Jeff is delightful and we'd like to hear him ramble on for much, much longer. But we're going to shift gears and we're going to jump over and talk a little bit about how I think short stories are often overlooked in terms of how they can really assist your career and give you a boost. The first thing, obviously, we're going to talk about, because we do live in a capitalist society, is we're going to talk about money. Short stories don't necessarily offer a huge upside in terms of money. Pro rates, which are, if anyone here is a member of the Sci-Fi Writers of America or the Mystery Writers of America, that they set pro rates to sort of determine who, in their opinion, is a pro writer or not, which you can agree with that idea that money is what defines that, or not agree with that. But it does have an impact, because that's how a lot of platforms and markets define themselves. They'll say we are a pro market because the Sci-Fi Writers of America says we're a pro market because we pay enough money. Those rates are not tremendous. Pro rates, range from 5 to 10 cents, basically, which is not that great. If you think about it, if you've written a 2,000 word short story and you sell it for 5 cents a word, you're getting a check for $100. That's not terrible in and of itself or on the face of it, but when you consider, oh, I spent 3 years working on that story, or maybe look at it as I spent 150 hours of my life working on that story, then suddenly it's not so great. On the flip side, just for a little bit of perspective, first-time advances for novels are also not so great. First-time advances for novels, for first novels from debut authors, have averaged about $6,500 for a long time now. It's one of those incredibly inflation-resistant numbers. It's been $6,500 for a really long time. Obviously, you're going to have exceptions. There'll be the occasional Donna Tartt who, get $400,000 for their debut novel, or Garthris Hallberg, who got $2 million for his debut novel. Those outliers will happen, but for your run-of-the-mill working authors, such as myself, your first novel very likely is going to get somewhere in the range of $6,500. which if you think about it, if your novel is about 100,000 words long, you're getting about 6.5 cents a word, which sort of falls right into that pro rate that these organizations have established. Now, of course, if your novel is much shorter, you'll get your word rate is a little higher. If it's much longer, your word rate may get a little lower. And of course, there's a lot of additional upside for novels that you don't necessarily have with short stories. You've got subsidiary rights, traditionally, translation rights, obviously film rights and things like that. And there's a long tail with royalties, which I published a novel, my second novel I published 15 years ago, and I'm still getting royalty checks twice a year from that book. Not huge royalty checks, but that tail is getting longer and longer every single year. So novels do have a lot more financial upside. Now, you can make significant money on a short story. It does happen. The most money I've ever made in one single short story was $1,250. And that is my ceiling for one short story is that number. Which is not bad. I'm certainly not complaining about selling a story for that amount of money. On the other hand, you think about how many of those stories I would have to sell every year in order to support myself, and it kind of puts it all into perspective about the kind of money you can make as a short story writer. On the other hand, the way I look at short stories very often is that I have sort of a rule of inverse sunk costs, which is I've already written this story. I've already put the time in, and I put the time and effort into this story in part out of passion because I enjoyed writing it, in part, as I've said, sort of about to refine my skills, to practice, to work on new techniques and stuff like that. So I've already put in that work, and I put in that work for myself. So why not now turn around and try and sell it? And if I don't necessarily get the kind of money I think the story is worth, then congratulations, you're a professional writer and that's your first lesson. You probably never will. The only other comment I would make about trying to sell short stories specifically is giving away short stories, which I've done, especially earlier in my career. I have given a short story here and there to a magazine or an anthology and not required any payment for it. I've sort of stopped doing that, and I think it's one of the best decisions I ever made was to not give away any short stories. And obviously, we all know the rule against trying to write for exposure. People die with exposure. You should always get paid for what you write. Your writing has value. Whatever market wants to publish your writing is obviously going to get a benefit from publishing your writing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be interested in the first place. So you should be paid for it. Everybody else involved with publishing your story is going to get paid for it. The editors are going to get paid in some way. Proofreaders are getting paid. Cover designers are getting paid. Typesetters are getting paid. Everybody else in the process gets paid. So I'm a big believer that the writer should always be paid. Obviously, there may be a few exceptions to that here and there, charity anthologies or something like that, or a friend needs a story, or there are going to be moments where you calculate that the publicity that you might get for being involved in a project will be worth it. But generally speaking, I think that the smartest thing I ever did was to stop even considering markets that don't even offer me at least some kind of payment for my work. And then to always starting with the highest paying markets and see what I can get for a particular work. Another thing to think about with short stories is that increasingly they are really, really important in terms of film and TV adaptation options. And an option used to be back in way back in the old days when producers or interested parties would buy the film or television rights, they would just buy them outright, lock, stock, and barrel. The reason that Ian Fleming's estate, for example, does not own the James Bond franchise is because the Broccolis bought it right out from under them. It wasn't a swindle, but they just bought the rights completely. They just own the rights wholesale. These days, it's a little bit different. Normally what happens, some of you may already be aware of this, and I apologize if I'm telling you stuff you already know. But these days what happens is they usually option your intellectual property first. And so what they do is they offer you a certain amount of money for a term during which they have exclusive rights to try and make something out of your story. So it's usually about 18 months, sometimes 12, sometimes 24. They'll offer you whatever X amount of money for an 18-month term. And at the end of those 18 months, if they haven't been able to turn your story or your novel into a TV show or a movie, they haven't gotten a deal somewhere, then the rights revert back to you and you can sell them again. You can sell them right back to the same people and they would have to pay you again for it, or you can find somebody else to sell it for it. And it used to be that, short stories very rarely got adapted. Sometimes when there was serial television, like The Twilight Zone or Playhouse 90 or something like that, short stories would get adapted for television. Sometimes you would have films that would be sort of anthologies as well, and they would bring in a short story for that. But for the most part, it was always focused on novels. That's really changing. There's this real kind of gold rush going on for short stories. You think about movies like Arrival from a couple of years ago starring Amy Adams, which was based on a story called Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. Paolo Bacigalupi, who wrote The Clockwork Girl. He's had a story, Mika Model, which was just optioned. Ken Liu, who's written a bunch of short stories, he has an entire collection of stories called Pantheon that was just recently optioned that they're trying to turn into either a series or an anthology film. And one of the most incredible recent examples that I saw is that a writer named Lena Crow, Krow, published a story called Sinkhole over at Mosslit, and you can read it if you Google it. Crow, Krow, Sinkhole at mosslit.com. You can read this story, Sinkhole. It's 4 pages long. It's probably 1,000 words at most, and it's a very good story. But I mean, it's really short. It is not a Russian novel. It is really short. And it was optioned by Jordan Peele last year to turn it into a feature film, not part of a television series, not a short film, but actually a feature film. And of course, very often producers do stuff like that because the premise itself, they're worried that if they make a film that has a very similar premise, they might just get into a little bit of trouble. So they might option it just to protect themselves. But the fact remains that Lena Crow wrote a 4-page short story that was published online on a platform that is not exactly a household name, and got her story optioned. So this is happening more and more and more. Short stories are really more strongly considered as the potential seeds for adaptations. I have a film agent that I work with, and we've had that conversation many times about turning stories into something. And obviously that hasn't worked out for me. But the dark side of options, as I can well tell you, is that they very often don't work out. Just because something's been optioned for a movie or a TV show doesn't mean they're going to actually turn into a film or TV show. I've been involved in about 10 option deals over the course of my career, none of which have worked out, which is not bad because I got paid for those options. So it was free money. They just handed me some money and they had invisible control over invisible rights on my story for a very fixed short amount of time. And then nothing came of it. So everything came back to me. But I would say probably 99% of option deals don't actually go anywhere. But that doesn't mean there's not some benefit to selling a story as an option. There are also a lot of other potential upsides to selling short stories for you. Number one, there are reprints. If you do publish a short story, keep in mind that there are a lot of markets out there that will happily reprint your story, which is just getting paid twice for the same story. And this is something I don't do enough of, partly because I'm lazy and partly because I'm disorganized. But these opportunities do exist, and I have had a few reprints happen. I had a story, usually when it does happen, it's because people reach out to me and say, oh, I saw this story, in this anthology. I'd like to reprint it in this anthology, and we just come to a quick arrangement for that. So there's a lot of double dipping that can be done with short stories. So even though you maybe don't make a ton of money on that first sale, the first serial rights that you might sell on a story, there's potential to, no guarantees, but there's potential that you could sell that story multiple times and get paid multiple times. The other thing to think about is that it's great for resume building in a way. We disparage, like I said, we talked about this, we disparage exposure. You shouldn't write for exposure. But having short stories in reputable, well-known places can help boost you a little bit. And there are a lot of writers who have created reputations for themselves as short story writers, which has given them this sort of this literary sheen that has made them more famous or more of a household name than they otherwise would have been. I think about somebody like George Saunders. George Saunders specializes in short stories. He was a working writer and a very successful working writer for 30 years before he published his first novel, Lincoln and the Bardo. And he continues to write short stories after that. That may be the only novel he ever actually publishes. But he's made such a name for himself. And George Saunders is an amazing short story writer. If you have not read any of George Saunders' work, you really should, because he is probably, in my opinion, probably the best short story writer working today. Maybe not of all time, but right now, living and working right now, I think George Saunders is probably the best guy out there. And he's totally known as a short story writer. You also have people like Hugh Howey, who's a huge name in self-publishing. That's where he I think he's traditionally published now, but he really made his bones. He was one of those early guys who got onto Amazon and became a self-promoter and really built himself up into this little self-publishing empire. And he's published, a lot of short stories, and he's kind of known as a short story writer first before he started putting out novels. You got. I mentioned Crying in H Mart before about Michelle Zauner. Other examples, I've got some notes here, some cheat sheet notes. Sophie McIntosh with The Water Cure, which won the Man Booker Prize, and that's a bunch of short stories. There is a way to leverage short stories to sort of burnish your credentials, and it may not necessarily mean big money in the short term, but by publishing short stories, especially publishing them in sort of literary journals or well-regarded, well-paying markets, big magazines. Like if you're talking about mysteries, if you can get into the Alfred Hitchcock mystery magazine, if you can get into Ellery Queen, things like that. For sci-fi, if you can get into Clark's World, if you can, publish on some of these platforms, you may not be getting rich publishing those stories, but you are building yourself up as, a well-known writer. You're building a platform for yourself, and it's often not always easier, but it is another avenue to go if you haven't been able to sell a novel, or if you have no interest in selling a novel. There's a whole other aspect there that you can look into. And there's also a lot of possibilities for anthologies. People tend to focus in on magazines or websites, to sell a story to, but anthologies are always looking for stories, and they are sometimes even easier because a lot of anthologies are themed. So if you have a story you've written that matches that theme, or if you can write a story really quickly that matches that theme, you can have a better chance of getting published there than you might if you were just one of a million stories being submitted to a magazine. And you never know how a short story is going to affect your career. And I'm going to sort of close out on another personal anecdote from my own career, which is in the beginning, when they introduced me, they mentioned that Ringing the Changes, my short story, was included in Best American Mystery Stories in 2006. And that story, I wrote it about a year before that, and I published it in a tiny anthology called Danger City from a even tinier publisher who also no longer exists. We can talk about the fact that every publisher I've ever worked with has gone out of business shortly after publishing me at another time. But this little publisher put out this anthology. My story was included in it, and that normally would have been the end of the story. But then I got contacted by Otto Penzler, and he's like, Scott Turow was the guest editor that year, and he's like, he loves your story, he wants to include it in this year's edition. And I was contacted within a couple of weeks by dozens of agents, who were like, you've been included in this anthology. Do you have representation? Do you need representation? And I did have an agent already at the time, but that, if I hadn't had an agent, that would have been like the most incredible opportunity to take the next step in my professional career. And I had no idea that was even a possibility when I sold that story. It was such a small anthology from such a small publisher that I thought, oh, it's nice to get a credit. It's nice to be involved in something, but I didn't think it was going to turn into anything particularly amazing, but it sort of did. So I guess my final note here with short stories is short stories often give you the illusion that they're small and that the opportunities are small and that the rewards are small. But very often they can lead to much bigger rewards, much bigger opportunities if you really stick with them in a consistent manner. And now we come to the legendary question time, where I see there's a few things populating the chat. I'm going to also skip ahead here and put up my contact information just so if anybody wants to make a note of it. Like I said, please don't hesitate to send me an email, hit me up on Twitter, show up at my house. I'm very, very easygoing and always happy to talk about this stuff. And that concludes my presentation here today. I don't know, do we want me to just sort of click on the chat up here and answer questions as they come in, or does somebody want to moderate them? I don't know how you guys like to do it.
Hey, Jeff, we got a little echo here. So Roger, can you turn that down for a sec? If you could go ahead and stop sharing screen, and then we'll go ahead and have Judy moderate questions online, and I'll do a handful here as well.
Okay, there you go.
All right, you can turn it back up, Judy.
Yeah, we just had some comments about, we were following up on things that you had mentioned. So there aren't any questions right now in the chat. Are there some in the room? In the live room? I do have a question. When we do our Redwood Writers anthologies, we submit and then we work with an editor. So when you're submitting a short story, are you then working with an editor? What's that process like?
It is always different. Normally, yeah, you do work with an editor. Usually it's the editor who also screened your story and accepted your story, in my experience, at least. Sometimes there'll be multiple editors involved, and honestly, every magazine or anthology or website that I've sold a story to has had a slightly different process. Some of them want anonymous submissions. They want you to strip your name out of everything and send in sort of an anonymized story so they have no idea who you are. Some places, will have multiple people read your story, and then they'll send back tons of feedback when they reject you. Some places just reject you, and some places don't even contact you. There's a bunch of platforms or markets where I've submitted stories over and over again, and you never hear anything back. And when I talk to other writers, I say, what's up with that place? They never say a thing. And they say, well, that's just how they do it. They, if they don't want your story, they just don't get back to you. And that is actually kind of on the rise. I've seen that a little bit more and more where they don't even get back to you. After the sale, then yeah, almost always I'll work with an editor. And again, my experience has varied tremendously. Some editors are very much like, oh, this story is great, we don't need to change a thing. And some editors will send immediately, 2 pages of notes saying, I'm sure we've all seen this. Oh, you're great, you're a genius, the story is fantastic. Here's 37 things we'd like you to change before we publish it. So I've had every kind of experience as far as that goes.
Okay. We do have some questions in the chat. The first one is, do you have your short stories in beta? I'm sorry, let me do this different. Does Jeff have his short stories beta read?
I am that weird writer who does not do beta readers at all. And which is not a non-endorsement. It's not me saying that people shouldn't use beta readers. I have a lot of writer acquaintances and friends who are very committed to the beta reader. It always ends up being beta reader. It's one of those I have to practice saying. But I know a lot of writers who swear by their beta readers. I've never done that. And part of it is when I was younger and sort of working, I was also that classic writer who was alone in a room. I didn't have a community of writers when I was coming up, when I was younger. My friends, when I was, in college and starting off as a young adult, were not literary. My friends were not writers. I didn't have writer friends. I was sort of just all on my own. I was always the weirdo writer in the group. And so it never even occurred to me that I should be, maybe I could get some valuable feedback from people. And so it's just something I've never done. And not because I think it's a bad idea. I think it's probably a fantastic idea. But I'm sort of fossilized now in how I approach things. And so no, but for no good reason, I don't do it.
Okay. Penny Ann Cole was asking, have you won awards for your stories, or was the publication the reward?
No, I have not won awards for my stories. Thank you for asking. But and it does sound like a cliche, to say that, like, it was an honor to be published or whatever. But actually, I do believe that. I'm not gonna lie and say I would not love to win, an award for a story at some point. I've been nominated for a few awards along the way, but never actually won one. But I do. I mean, honestly, the thrill for me, and I have this whole thing, which is way too much for this Zoom meeting, but I have this whole thing about, like, I want my words out there. I'm gonna die someday, and I'll have these stacks of manuscripts and these hard drives with words, and they're going to just, Lord knows what will happen. So I want to get as many words out there into the world as I possibly can. So for me, the publishing is the reward. Like, every time I publish something, it's like there's one more thing out there that I've contributed that you never know, 10 years from now, 100 years from now, maybe pulled out and be like, who's this guy? Who wrote this story? This is really good. How come it didn't get more attention at the time?
Yeah.
And you do see that, where writers will suddenly have a resurgence years after they're gone. So for me, I absolutely, the publishing is the reward, and I can say that with full sincerity.
Okay. And Jan Rowley wanted to know about not following the rules for today's short stories. What exactly, how would you frame that?
If you're talking in terms of craft, I don't think there's ever been any rules for how to tell a short story. And if you're trying to break rules, if you're trying to break out a little bit, I think the best thing that you can do, well, first of all, I mean, the meta piece of advice is read a lot of stories. Read stories outside your favorite genre. Very often we get trapped in our own, like, we write mysteries and we read mysteries, and that's all we do. And that may help you write better mysteries, but you're leaving out, the 95% of all the stuff that's out there, some of which is amazing, and some of which can teach you a lot about writing and storytelling that you can steal for your own writing. Also, read outside your culture. Read translations. Read, if you're read fiction that's being published in Japan. Read Russian literature. Read everything you can. Specifically, when it comes to craft, breaking rules comes down to knowing what rules you're following in the first place. And writing is often such an instinctual process that we're not always even consciously aware of the fact that every story we write, we follow a certain pattern. We're not consciously aware that we always open with a description of a place, which we don't think of as a rule, but it's something that we do, maybe you do all the time as a writer. And once you notice those patterns, once you sort of look at your stories objectively and say, like, okay, I always do this. And every time I introduce a character, I describe them looking in the mirror. Maybe I could break that. I could break out of that a little bit. Maybe you notice that you always write in the third person all the time. You've never written the story in the first person, and this might be a time to try it. Things like that are what you can do to sort of break out of your own rules. As far as like market rules and stuff like that, the problem that you run into a lot of times with short stories is that editors are always trying to tell you what they want. And my experience has been that they often don't really know what they want. Because I have submitted stories sometimes to markets where it's really not at all, it doesn't really match up at all with what they've said. They put in this very shrill description about, we're only looking for these kinds of stories, and it has to be this, and it has to be this. And I'll have a story that's like, this is sort of like 60% that, it's a starfish, they want a triangle. And I'll send it out anyway, because especially, these days, thank God for email, because I used to have to send all my stories out prints, through the mail. And it always cost me $7 every time I submitted a story. And when I was 21, that was serious beer money. So email now is like magic. So I'll submit stories sometimes, even though I'm fairly sure it's not exactly what they're looking for. But I'll tell you, sometimes they come back and like, you know what? I don't know why, but I like this story and I'm going to buy it. And my takeaway is that editors only know what they want like 30% of the time. And if you really give them something interesting and something great, they will often break their own rules and publish you, even though it's not what they said they were looking for. So I guess as I've rambled my way to this point, the big thing is don't get too hung up on what people tell you they want or what people tell you the market is looking for. Just sort of put yourself out there and see what happens.
Okay. And Darlene Robson wanted to know how to handle multiple submissions. Is it okay, not okay? How long do you wait before you send it to different places? And like you said, sometimes you'll never hear back from some of the places.
Right. Multiple submissions or simultaneous submissions, as they're called sometimes. Usually, most marketplaces will explicitly tell you what their policy is. They'll say, that's totally fine, or they'll say, we want this to be an exclusive submission. And so I would, definitely look there, read the guidelines and see what they say there. If they don't say anything at all about it, my assumption is that they're okay with simultaneous submissions. The chance, and I look at it this way too, is like, what are the chances you're going to sell that story to two places at the same time, exactly in the same moment, are very low. So I don't worry about it too much. However, full disclosure, I don't do a lot of simultaneous submissions because I am very easily confused and very easily distracted in my professional life. And it's easier for me to track a story, to one place, and I wait till it comes back before I do anything else. Otherwise, it just evolves into chaos. I generally wait about 6 months before I will bother an editor about a short story. Editors are busy. They get a lot of submissions for every opportunity. So, I'll give them some time. And then if I don't hear anything within, 8 months, 12 months, I'll just sort of assume the story is dead. Like they either rejected it passively or, sometimes you find out the market closed after you sent the story in, you'll check on it and be like, oh, that magazine no longer exists. Okay. But you're going to have to come up with those numbers yourself, what you're comfortable with. And, sometimes if you've got a story that's sort of topical, if it's a story you think I've got a window here where people are going to be interested in this, you might want to tighten those numbers up a little bit and say, like, I'm going to give this place 3 weeks. And then if I don't hear anything, I'm going to bother them because I don't want to publish this story 2 years from now when everyone's like, oh, I don't even remember why we were worried about this.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. We've got 2 more questions and then we have to wrap up. They're somewhat related. One is, can you name where to submit for television shows? The second one is the best advice you can give to a new writer aiming for SFWA qualified short story publication. So they're not identical, but in the same vein.
Okay. Now, again, this is one of those, your mileage may vary. There may be a smarter, more connected writer out there that knows better. As far as I know, there's no submission process for TV shows. Most TV shows follow a writer's room process, which is where you have a showrunner, and the showrunner then gathers a team of writers together, and the showrunner says, here's your basic premise, here's some story ideas, hit me with your thoughts. And then the writers all come up with ideas, and then they compete with each other to see who can get in there. Most of the time, it's not a case of spec scripts where you write a script on spec and then send it in, and they're like, oh, this is great, and then they use it. That does happen. It has happened. There are examples of people who have sold spec scripts to television shows, or they've used spec scripts not so much that they sell the script, but they use it as a way in, where the people in charge are like, you know what, this person gets the show and they're a good writer. Let's bring them into the team. Stuff like that can happen. But for the most part, there's no real process for that I'm aware of. If you're interested in a specific show, if you want to write for Rick and Morty, or you want to write for Grey's Anatomy or something like that, you can probably work up a spec script and send it to the production company. Do some research, find out who's the producers, who's the showrunner, who handles the script editing and stuff like that, and send it to them as sort of a, just a submission. I don't think you'll have a lot of success with that, but at the same time, I don't think there's any reason not to do it either. There's no real downside to it. As far as advice goes for getting into SFWA, the SFWA has a list of approved pro markets. And there's a whole process when a market, ups their pay rate. I think SFWA right now is 8 cents a word, if I'm remembering correctly. So essentially, any market out there that pays you 8 cents a word and it's speculative fiction focused will qualify you for the SFWA. And the SFWA does have a list of approved markets, but they don't need to be approved necessarily for it to qualify. Those are just them trying to pay attention and just sort of as a convenience for you. So if you sell it to some weirdo anthology that no one's ever heard of, but they paid you, and it's a sci-fi or a fantasy or spec fic in some way, chances are, the SFWA will accept that. They're not in the business of denying people of getting into the SFWA. So that will probably work. And as far as like choosing the markets to get into, that just boils down to choose the market that you think your story is best for and start there. If your goal is to get into the SFWA, one thing to keep in mind is that you can join as an affiliate member. You don't have to be a pro member. You don't get the full, experience or all the benefits and everything, but you can get in there, and that allows you to sort of participate. And it's a great networking opportunity because you can talk to all the other pro writers, the people who have been there for 20 years, who have published a lot of things. So that's a great place to start too, is to get in there, volunteer a little bit, and be part of the community, and that will help you network and find your way in.
Cool. I'm going to turn it over to Sean because I think there's some questions in the room.
Yeah, and we're going to have a little echo here. So those who are here local right now, we're just going to have to grin and bear it. But I want to make sure that for the benefit of everybody who's online and here, is there anybody here that has a question they want to ask Jeff? Quiet group. So I'll break the ice here, Jeff. I mean, you talked about your craft and so much of how to just kind of digest everything down so you don't lose it, and you might have some ultimate purpose for it to market it later, but it's a great tool. In terms of marketing though, nobody's asked a question, and I'll ask it point blank because I'm a stubborn guy, but are you writing full time? I mean, is this self-sustaining for you, or do you have other stuff that you're doing as well?
I'm writing full time, but part of what I do is freelance writing, which is, not fiction, which is, although a lot of that, to be honest with you, is book reviews, writing about writing for Writer's Digest, writing about books for BookBub and stuff like that. So it's all sort of tangentially related, but it's not all fiction. I'm not necessarily supporting myself solely from short stories and novels. There's a lot of freelance in the mix there as well. But I am a full-time writer. That's all I do is write all day, every day.
I appreciate it. And I know that there's lots of other avenues. Just for the sake of time, you didn't have, the time to go into that, but I know my wife has written on Medium and gotten some money there. So there are other outlets, either as a freelance writer or not necessarily for short stories in particular, that you can monetize your craft. And you might even be able to repurpose that for a New Yorker or something like that if you're fortunate enough to get picked up.
Well,
have you done any of that?
Not specifically, but one thing I've been really interested in watching is that a lot of the self-publishing platforms like Amazon and even Google Play, they've started to dabble in this idea of short stories, of selling things on a subscription basis, like a serial short story kind of service. Which, I got a couple of emails about that a few months ago, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I want to look into that. And then of course, there's still a, unread email marked on in my inbox from like 3 months ago that I haven't gone back to look into. But there are a lot of opportunities for that. There's a website called Curious Fictions, which you can create an account on. And Curious Fictions allows you to sell sort of a subscription. It's kind of like a Patreon model in a way. Where people can sign up, and I think for $1 a month or $3 a month or something like that, they follow you, and you can publish stories there. And every time you publish a story there, all of your followers or your subscribers are alerted. And then every month, Curious Fiction gives you a cut of however many people are subscribing to you. And I joined that a couple of years ago, and I had a lot of fun setting that up, and I got really into it for a while, and then I sort of just drifted away from it because the sad downside of being a freelance writer is that it sort of takes over your entire life. And I just don't have enough time and energy sometimes to promote everything that's out there. But Curious Fictions is a great option. Medium is a great place to sort of, put your work out there and at least get some kind of compensation for it and a lot of attention for it. I think there are a lot of those channels out there if you look for them, where you can sort of passively set up accounts. Substack is another great option that people are starting to really get into. And I just started a newsletter myself on Substack, which was linked to Writing Without Rules. And Substack is really easy to set up. And it's a free account, and it's a newsletter service, but you can use that any way you want to. And I've actually I'm using it as a newsletter service, but I've toyed with the idea of setting up a monthly short story delivery option. In Substack, you don't You can set Substack to be free. You don't have to charge people for it, but you can charge a subscription fee if you want to, where then Substack will take, you know, a cut for their service. But you can monetize whatever you're writing. And then the last thing I would mention is podcasts are, you know, I know we're all writers here, but podcasts are huge, and tons of writers. I'm sure a lot of people here have podcasts. And I set up a podcast where I talk about my short stories because I have a lot of short stories that I've published and I enjoy talking about them so much. So that's another option where you can, you know, I talk about my short stories and then I read the story and I put in some sound effects and stuff like that to try and make it more of a, you know, an entertaining experience for people. And there's a lot of those opportunities out there. And if you're creative and you're open to things and maybe a tiny bit computer savvy sometimes, you can really, really leverage any fiction you've written, any writing you've done at all, you can leverage it into an income stream.
There you go. I was just going to say, you know, we're going to put a bow on this, but somebody else put in chat. Are there any other questions here? Nobody has anything burning they want to ask Jeff? You're not, the echo I know is annoying, but speak up. No? Yes.
Protect copyright his stories when he publishes them online.
Say it one more time.
Does he protect or copyright his stories?
Adele is asking if you protect or copyright your stories when you publish them online.
Not explicitly. I don't file. I've never actually filed a single copyright form in my entire life. Yeah, in the US and most Western countries, copyright is automatic. As soon as you write it, it is copyrighted. It's not a bad idea necessarily to copyright your work, but I've never ever found it necessary. And maybe I have bad advice, but the professional people I've worked with, my agent, my film agent, you know, editors I've worked with, no one has ever said to me, "Oh, you should get this copyrighted." You don't have to file for copyright. You don't have to actually even make an explicit copyright statement. You're always protected by copyright. The one exception to some of that I would mention is if you've got a character or a pen name sometimes, or a specific kind of universe that you've worked on, you might consider trademarking it. Only because it's hard to protect names and stuff like that. If you've got a character that, you know, you've written several novels that you're hoping to publish someday, you might want to trademark the character name just to make sure nobody else can take that character name and start using it. But I've actually never worried about filing a copyright form.
That's great. We do have one more last question in the chat. It's basically referring from Christine. She says, do you still write a story a month in longhand and notebooks? And then basically, I think the ulterior question here is really, how do you keep track of all that? A story a month for 30 years is 360 stories, right? If my math, yeah. That's a lot. That's enough for like 5 or 6 volumes. How do you keep track, or do you have a catalog system is her question?
Well, I do still do it. This is notebook. This is a notebook I'm working on right now. So this is where I've gotten to. And I am working on the 6th story this year. So yeah, I definitely do it. It is a lot. And, you know, one thing to keep in mind is sort of what I alluded to earlier is these stories are not always gold. You know, these stories are not always like, wow, I've just written the greatest story in the world. Sometimes it's like, okay, there's a job done. And what I do is I have a spreadsheet, and on the spreadsheet, I keep track of the title of the story, the word count of the story, when it was completed. And then if I sell a story, I'll mark it, you know, I sort of highlight it and say, okay, this story is sold. If I consider the story interesting enough that I actually go in and revise it and polish it up and work on it so I can submit it out, I also mark it with like a different highlight, you know, so I'll have some are marked as this is a story I think is pretty good and I'm trying to sell it. And these are stories I've actually sold. And then I put little notes on the side, you know, so if I get an interesting rejection, you know, like if I get an editor who says, I love this story, but it missed this part for me, I might make a note there and say, maybe in a future revision, I can look at that and go back to it. Or if, you know, sometimes if you sell a story and then something happens, I had a story sold once and the magazine sent the contract. We used to be able to sell stories just by, you know, like a handshake basically, but now I get a contract every single time. And this place sent me a contract where for $250, they wanted every single subright that the story had. They wanted film rights, they wanted translation rights. They even had the amusement park rights wrapped up in this contract. that they thought they were buying for $250. And I had to pull the story back from them and say, we can't do that. So I'll make a note about that too, like just sort of keep a record of where it's been and what's happened. So that's basically it. It's just sort of a dumb Excel spreadsheet, but that's how I keep track of everything.
Okay, that was great. I think you gave us a
We're
lot.
going to give you a real round of applause.
Thank
here,
you.
'cause that's the advantage of being hybrid. You can actually hear people and, you know, the whole podcast, webcasts, talking in a box and all that. It's just crazy. So thank you. We're fortunate that you're here and you're all the way on the other coast. And that's one of the advantages we get to have by still having a hybrid or Zoom meeting. So thank you for coming and sharing some insights with us, Jeff, and working with Judy and Marilyn to get this dialed in. And we'd love to have you back at some future point, possibly for a conference. Hopefully in person. I don't know if we're going to be able to pull that off online. It's just problematic. So thank you.
I would
very
love
much.
that. I loved being here and I really had a great time. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'll reiterate again, anybody wants to drop me a line, don't hesitate to ask a question. I'm happy to answer.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, guys.
So Judy, I don't know how we're going to do this, but we're going to go ahead and transition into member announcements. There are some members that are online and there's a handful here. So what are you talking about?
Sorry, I just put myself on mute and I'm talking.
Yeah, Roger, I got it.
If you're online and you want to raise your hand, that would be helpful. And Sean, why don't you start with folks in the room and I'll keep a lookout for folks here in the Zoom room.
That's what I'm going to do. And I got multiple people talking at me right now. So we're going to
sorry.
go. This is not rocket science for anybody who's at home or here. It's the same format. It's the board announcements first, then the member announcements, and anything special that we have going on. So that's the format, the same way we're doing it on Zoom. It's the same way when we're on Zoom and in person. So it's easy, it's duplicatable. We're going to come up there. I'm going to hold the camera up. We're going to rock and roll, but you guys have had all of the action. We're bringing it back in-house because we're here in person. When you come up, you don't have to wear a mask, but stay 6 feet away from me. And for anybody who does show up, please wear a mask. There are people here that don't have masks. That's not my rules. It's the rules of the facility. So if you don't have a mask, you need to have a mask or we might not be able to meet here. And I'm saying that to the people here and to you because it's not my rules. It's the County of Santa Rosa. So please wear a mask, okay? That's my public service announcement. Do you want to go ahead and kick off the contest, Tina? I'm going to start with you and then we're going to go to Norton's announcements because I think it's important.
And you should be able to see yourself there.
Oh, there I
So
am.
just stand
Oh,
back.
you got
a
a
little.
camera over there? Sweet.
Back a little.
You can do it. Does that work out?
You got it.
Hi, everyone. Okay. Okay, we just recently finished up our contest and we have 3 winners for the I've Made a Terrible Mistake contest. But before I want to announce our winners, I want to thank our judges again. We have Sandy Baker, who's here. Want to come over and give a quick hello? Sandy is a past president for the Redwood Writers. She writes children's stories, and I was reading her bio again, and I saw that she is a grammar geek, and now I'm rethinking all the emails I sent you. So thank you very much for participating.
I enjoyed it.
It was
I
fun.
really, yeah,
It was
I really
fun.
did.
Good way to get to know all the writers and what they write. Also, Kimberly Ingalls, she's on Zoom. I believe I saw her up there, and she is a editor.
She's
writing
knitting in the
coach.
corner there.
There she is. She's an editor, writing coach, and she focuses her writing.
Crochet.
I know. It was a good day for that. She writes about personal topics like love, romance, memory loss, grief, and examines the human mind. So we had some really terrific judges on our contest. So our 3rd place contest winner is not a member of the Redwood Writers yet. We're going to reach out to them, but he lives in Santa Rosa. He has published 5 novels as ebooks and paperbacks, all on Amazon Kindle, and they include Refuge Earth, Raven, and Wolfhaven, all in the Refuge Omnibus SF series. So I'm going to have to look into that, plus a couple of other books. And his name is Foy Minson, and he is our third place winner. So congratulations to Foy. Our second place winner.
What's the story?
Sorry. Yep, his story was Good Guy with a Gun. So that was, Good Guy with a Gun. And these stories are going to be online, so you're going to get a chance to read them. Our second place winner is a longtime Redwood Writers member, and he says, I benefit more from the Writers Club circles and salons than I do my therapist. With 12 sales to Chicken Soup for the Soul anthologies, his aim is currently toward a Pulitzer Prize. So that would be John Lissack. So he's here today to collect his prize.
Come on down, John.
I'll stand back. There is your prize. And his story is The Legend of the Sand Dollar. That was I liked that one.
Oh, very good.
Thank you, thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you for this.
Congratulations. Pardon me?
Can I thank other people?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yes,
want
go
to
ahead.
thank Chrissy and Sean Langwell because we have been emailing. But Chrissy, did you edit my story for
Not with this one, no, that was.
the anthology?
But for the entrance and she put Marlene.
Yeah, I've been working with Marlene. She's wonderful. I recommend her. I recommend you too. She edited the one for the anthology, and I just wanted to publicly thank her.
Oh, yeah.
Very good.
Thank you again. And thank you for this.
All right, and our first place winner, let's see, she is an award-winning author who writes fiction, memoir, and poetry, and plays. Her work has been produced at 6th Street Playhouse, Petaluma Readers Theater, and Off the Page. She's the author of Sleeping with the Gods and Hurting Jade and Other Tales of Folly, and that is no other than Jean Wong. So congratulations. And this is for her story. Her story is Into the Box, and that one will also be published in the newsletter. So we get to have some really good short stories to read. So that was great to have our speaker today, so he could encourage us to write stories. You never know when you can enter them into the contest and have a winning prize. So thank you to all of the people who entered, and thank you to our judges and all of the people who got to win.
Jean was online.
Nice job.
Yeah, so thank you.
She was, yeah.
Great job. Well prepared, and I jumped it because I got you guys can't see it, but when you show up, you can actually see these things that are called nonverbal communication, because I got the stink eye from our previous president about, you need to have the contest first. So anyway, now we are going to move into the board announcements. Then we're going to do member announcements. And there are some people in the back of the room that you can't see that have lots of good stuff going on. So stick around, help support your members. In terms of member announcements, let's go ahead and start with Roger. You want to go ahead and step up and just talk about new members? Or I'm sorry, board announcements. Yes.
Sean, we should actually let Jean say something. She is here.
You know what? I didn't see her. Is she there? Roger,
Yeah,
do you
she's
mind real
here.
quick?
Yeah, she's there. She just moved back in the screens.
All right, Jean, I looked and I didn't see you there. So please say what you like. The floor is yours.
Needs a picture.
I'm the, Jean, do you want to start your video or not?
What?
I'm going to start your video. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
There you
Hi.
are.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your acknowledgement, and I'm deliriously happy that you actually like the story. I do want to give credit to my late brother, who was a magician and an endocrinologist. And years ago, he put me in a box, just like the one described in my story, and made me disappear and reappear. So he did that along with, other things like cutting my arms and legs off and, various and sundry things. So I've written this is actually my second kind of box story. I wrote one as a memoir, a box story is a box memoir story. And then this one, of course, is totally fiction, but you never know what your brother is going to end up making you do. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And Jean, you're still in a box. Let you out of here. Congratulations. I'm gonna have to read it. I guess I have to wait until the newsletter comes out next month. So Roger, go ahead and talk about member announcements, and then we'll take it from there. Announcements.
We're still in the renewal period, so you have another 10 days to renew if you haven't renewed your membership, and some have not. Also, just something to mention, sometime in an earlier email from Constant Contact, you may have said, "I hate these things," and unsubscribed. When you did that, you no longer received any announcements from us or the monthly newsletter. So a number of members have recently said to me, "Why aren't I getting the newsletter?" Well, it's because you unsubscribed, and that's our only way of communicating with you. So if you may have done that or even aren't sure, you can send me an email to membership.org, membership chair or membership, redwoodwriters.org, and I'll check for you, and I can resubscribe you anytime you want. Same with Groups IO. Right now we have 263 members, but of our renewed and new members, we have 9 new members this year, and we have 187 total members who are now current, if you will. And we're hoping that by the end of the month, we will hit at least 200 renewed members, which would put us at about 75% renewal, which is good for us. The other thing to just mention is, you can see it there on your screen and in here, how many of you have a trailer for a novel or story that you've made yourself or had done professionally? How many have a trailer? Anybody? A book trailer. You know what a book trailer is? It's where you show your book online, and it's like a movie, right? Well, the third week of October is California Writers Week, and that is something that was created in the legislature because of a motion put forward by the California Writers Club. And all across the country, state, we're going to celebrate our California writers. What we want to do here in Redwood Writers is, if you have an existing trailer, like Robbie Summers Bryant has a horrific one that's great, then what we want to do is post that on our Facebook and on our CW and our Redwood YouTube channel. So we're going to make an announcement in the newsletter just about if you want to do a 3-minute recording of you reading from your book, or if you want to just tell us about yourself as a writer, like Jeff mentioned, as a blog. What we'll do is, if you submit that, then we will post it during California Writers Week, and there'll be more announced about that in the newsletter and in an email. I think that's it, John.
I got to multitask. Thank you, Roger. So we've got, I don't know if there's any other board members here that have announcements. I have some that I'll wrap up, and Marilyn will talk about future speaking. I'm going to turn it back over online. Judy, you want to go ahead and run it, and then we'll do you and Robin. And I don't see Linda on here. And then Deborah Taylor French, feel free to jump in, and then we'll bring it back to member announcements here. Okay.
Okay. Robin Gabbard is first, actually.
Hi, I just want to let everybody know that in October, we will have Salon on Saturday, October 23rd from 1 to 3 p.m. Currently, we are planning to have a live outdoor salon. It'll be at my house in my condominium complex, because we have a nice outdoor park area with a gazebo. That's weather permitting, of course. If weather is not permitting, we'll just revert to Zoom. But if weather is permitting, we'll be outdoors at my gazebo. Hopefully it'll be nice, 70 degrees, and we can all be outside. I am asking that everybody that attends be vaccinated. And we will have some snacks and drinks, as is traditional for Salon. And we had a really nice outdoor salon there in August. Although it was hotter than Blue Hades, our attendees did hold up really well, and we had some really nice readings and a lot of fun. So I'm hoping you'll come out in October. We have the traditional, Halloween month at Salon, which we always get some nice scary stories and eerie tales. And, so hopefully we'll have some nice poetry and stories. So please respond on the website if you're going to attend. And and I will, I'll record that you're going to be there, and please let me know. I hope you'll be there.
Okay, terrific. And now Deborah Taylor French.
Deborah, you got to unmute.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now? Hi. Author support group met in person again this month, just before the meeting, but from now on, it's going to have to be on Zoom. I am a caregiver now for a critically ill person, so I will not be taking any more public events for a while. So we will go to Zoom, and I will discuss with Sean whether I'll revert to the first weekend or stay with just before the general meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. I don't see any other hands raised at the moment. So Sean?
All right. Well, thank you. Hey, Judy, you're doing a great job. This is not as easy. It's actually easier all being on Zoom, but we're figuring it out. So thanks for all your guys' patience. We're going to bring up Mary. Not Mary, I'm sorry. Marilyn. Marilyn, and then you want to come up? I'm drawing a blank on her name.
Oh.
You're going to go over there.
over there, right?
Yeah.
You're getting back, honey.
Yeah, well, that would be easiest, probably.
I guess you can see my shoulders. Oh, no, can you see my face?
Yeah, it's cutting everybody's head off at the top.
What if I sit?
You can.
Better.
Go ahead.
Okay, let's try
There we
that.
are.
Oh, is that better? Okay, thank you. All right, so we are on a roll. We're ending our featured speaker year, if you will, in October and November by having panels. So next month, on October 16th, we're going to have our very own Redwood Writers panel that will give us a tour, or who will give us a tour of Redwood Writer groups and offerings. And so listen up, everybody, because you might be the lead. You might be on this panel and not really realize it. So I just want to be sure you hear this. So we will have Linda Reed talking about the Writers Circle and Redwood Writers Poetry Anthology, I believe. Does that sound right? Robin Gabbert, this will be perfect for your timing on the salon. You'll be talking about the salon and what you do. Each speaker, by the way, will have about 3 to 5 minutes total, because we're trying to give a whole melange, the sort of tasting, right? If we're in wine country, but a tasting for each of these groups and what they do, and give especially our new members and people who've not been so active for a while, really good idea of what's available to everyone. Deborah Taylor French, author support group. Marie Judson, critique groups. Sean and Christy will talk about the Redwood Writers anthologies. Sean, you'll be talking about the biennial conference next May, is that right?
I'll mention it, but I'm not going to go too deep because it's too far out.
Just a little bit, sure, okay. And writing contests, we know our own Tina Deason. And I'm not so sure about Jeannie Sloan talking about the fair. So that's one thing that I didn't have on my list, but probably should have. Pardon me? And then the author launch. Okay. Oh, that's right. The author launch. Okay. All right. So we have a lot going on, and that will be a very rich, dense program for October. Then in November, Natasha Yim will moderate the panel that we've been waiting for on children's authors' books
She will be moderating this panel on November 20th. We originally set that panel, believe it or not, for April of 2020, and look at where we are now. This will be November 20th of 2021. So it's been quite delayed, but I think it's going to be well worth it because we have a sort of a star-studded panel coming in, including not only our own Natasha, who's published many children's books and is just doing wonderfully in her career, but we also have May Respicio, Mira Shriram, I hope I give them pronounce their names correctly, and Matali Perkins. So if you're interested in knowing more about them, look up their websites, and you will see what an amazing array of literary works each of these authors has already published. So we're looking forward to that. I think I'll hold off from there, and we'll talk about 2022 next time, but we're really getting most of the openings in 2022 are already booked, and some of these speakers are amazing. So I think it's exciting for us. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marilyn. And then I'm wondering, both Nancy, come on up and tell us what you got going on. If there's any other members who have stuff that they want to share, either talks they're doing or books they're coming out, come in behind Nancy, and then we're going to take it back over to Deborah Taylor French, who has her hands up, and somebody else, Kimberly Ingalls. Go ahead, Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Martin, and this is my memoir, From the Summer of Love to the Valley of the Moon. And I've also been an avid short story writer for the majority of my life, and I'd like to thank the speaker for his great suggestion of writing a short story a month. I think that's a really super suggestion. The book has just been published in Reading Nation magazine as a reader's pick. I've also been fortunate to be selected, my short story, Those Colorful Streets, selected for the Redwood Writers Anthology, and also for the Pulpwood Queens Book Club Anthology out of Texas. So that's very exciting. And they recently did a Zoom interview with me earlier this week. And then the last thing is Chat and Spin Radio out of England in the UK is doing an interview with me on Saturday, September 5th at 9 a.m. Pacific time, and that's CHAT&SPINRADIO.com. And that's pretty exciting. Thank you.
That's so exciting. Look at that. Is there anybody, I mean, that was just awesome, Nancy. And if you haven't read it, I read a book. There's a lot. I grew up in that area. It's a fun read. It's a heavy read to a certain extent, but the storyline is just fantastic. Is there anybody else here that has a member announcement that wants to come up? All right. DTF, you're up.
Hi. I have some pretty exciting news for me. I've won my first writing prize. I entered a contest that was run online by the local Petaluma History Museum called Black and White in Black and White. And it's about historic African-American development after the Civil War. And that African Americans began, the ones who had skills and the ones who were able to marshal education, to have middle class and upper class lives, to get degrees, etc. So I picked one of the photos there that was very quiet, having really no idea to winning anything. And I sent in the poem about this young woman reading a book. And I got second place. And I would love to have you tune in. If you want the Zoom link, you can write to me at my initials, dtfwriter@gmail.com, or you can connect with the Petaluma History Museum online. It's going to be October 1st, and there will be a reading of the winning poets, first, second, and third place. And there's also going to be a chapbook created from the poetry contest. So I'm very excited about the historical significance of this. as well as my own personal surprise. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Okay, Kimberly?
Kimberly, yes.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is I was really happy to be invited to be a part of the contest. So congratulations to all of the winners, and thank you for entrusting me to be a part of that. The second thing is that I am excited because next month at Napa Valley, I just scheduled Miss Ann Perry, and she's going to be in conversation with Miss Victoria Zackheim and talking to us about the importance of outlining your novel, which apparently is now part of her contract. So she's imparting everything that she's actually had to learn about it. But Ann Perry is, quite successful, as you know. She was named by New York Times as one of the 100 best crime authors of the 20th century. So I'm very excited to have her. The meeting is going to be Wednesday, October 13th. And it's not up on the website yet, but keep an eye out, and hopefully we'll see some of you there.
That's
Wonderful.
awesome, Kimberly. And for
Wonderful.
those who don't know, Kimberly and I were working feverishly to try and get both Ann and Victoria up for the conference before COVID hit. So I don't know that we're going to be able to pull it off when we do have a conference next year. So I don't know if they're still on here, but we have people at this meeting from 5 or 6 of the different chapters in the California Writers Club. So that is, for those who wonder why we're still doing it on Zoom, because we have the capacity to reach people who are all the way up in the foothills and all the way down into Southern California for some. So we'll continue to do this.
I did forget to say that this meeting will be on Zoom. We are still currently on Zoom. So
awesome.
Yeah.
That's so great. I don't have anything else. I want to just thank you. This is for your patience. This is not the easiest thing. I'm a creature of habit, and I like to find a routine. And when I get a routine, I like to stick to it. But maybe that's the lesson I get to learn in this life is, nothing is permanent. Chrissy, you want to talk about the anthology? Get up here.
Well, I don't know what to say.
Oh, just. Where are we at? This is a team because this effort, I gotta say, when we do, we're probably not gonna do the next one. Whoever steps up to do the next anthology, do it as a team. It's so much easier. She does what she does best, and I do what I do best, which is flap at the gums and send a whole lot of emails, and she takes care of the back end stuff. So where are we at?
We're right now in editing. So all the submissions that were accepted are now with editors. We've gotten a couple of them back. I've already started laying out the book, and I'm really excited about that because it's like, this is when it becomes like the real thing. So we have a lot of really great submissions this year, and I can't wait for you guys to read it. And hopefully this will be done. We're shooting for December. So, but we're moving right along, and I'm really happy with how the pace is going, and everybody's right on board. So, and I want to thank all of the people that have helped us. We had awesome judges this year that gave some really great feedback to our authors. We have an excellent team of editors right now who are working with our authors. I couldn't be more proud of the team that we have. So you guys are going to see a really great product when we get this out there.
Yeah, and it's going to be a thick book too. There's 49 of the 59 stories that were submitted are in editing right now. So, that's a good number. The past anthologies are somewhere around 44 to Chrissy, I think, had 55 because she had double stories, but still, this is going to be a great piece. It's a great learning experience for me. And that's part of the reason why I raised my hand to say, all right, I'm up for the challenge. So I encourage each and every one of you to take what Jeff talked about as a challenge, because practice does make us better in everything we do. And I don't know that I could write a short story every single month, but you know what? That's a lot of material to turn into other stuff.
I take it as a challenge. I think all of us should do that.
NaNoWriMo's coming up. NaNoWriMo's coming up. So start warming up. Anyway, does anybody else have anything else? I don't want to miss anybody. Mara, you got anything? We got 2 new members for those who don't know, and I forgot your names already that were here. Welcome. There are new members that keep joining. If you haven't renewed your membership, as Roger already said, we've got 12 days to get her done. So until next month, I will follow through with all the chairs and communicate out to all of you as to whether or not we're going to have some kind of a semblance of a hybrid for this forum. I don't have it figured out yet, and you guys are just going to have to deal with it because we'll figure it out between now and then. Until then, have a great rest of your Saturday.